So good morning. My name is Jeremy Prepsis, and I lead BSR's practice in Asia Pacific, where I'm based in Hong Kong. It's my very great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Annie Griffiths, photographer and founder and executive director of Ripple Effect Images. One of the first female photographers to work for National Geographic, Annie has photographed in nearly 150 countries during her illustrious career, and has worked on dozens of magazine and book projects for National Geographic. Annie's work has also appeared in Fortune, Geo, Life, and Stern, amongst other publications. Annie is known for her warmth and for her ability to quickly create photographs that humanize various situations and cultures. She also has built her reputation while often bringing her children along on many of her far-flung assignments, and chronicles the story in the book, A Camera, Two Kids, and a Camel. In addition to her magazine work, Annie is deeply committed to photographing for aid organizations around the world. She's the founder and executive director of Ripple Effect Images, a collective of photographers who document programs that empower women and girls in the developing world. Ripple has produced 26 films and built a photo library of more than 20,000 images since 2010. Using these assets, Ripple's aid beneficiaries have raised millions of dollars, expanded their program to multiple countries, and proven that women and girls are the best investment the world can make in our shared future. Please help me in welcoming Annie Griffiths. Thank you. Thank you.
What a great panel, huh? I learned so much, really. I'm going to start by introducing you to my mother. And my mom, let's see if I make this work, yep. My mom was a Midwestern, simple, lovely, good girl. But she was also had this understanding of just the right amount of wrong, and she taught it to me. Mom was born on the day that Charles Lindbergh flew the Atlantic, May 20th, 1927. And so for a kid from Minnesota, that was a big deal. And her whole life she was told, wow, you were born the day that Lindbergh. So she was very interested in flight. And when she finished high school, she went to the airlines. And this was back in the good old sexist Pan Am days. And she wanted to be a flight attendant, stewardess then. But as soon as they took one look at her, because like all the Griffiths girls, she was blind, they saw her glasses and they said, oh, well, you really don't need to apply because, you can imagine in turbulence how they could go flying off your head. And so my mom didn't push back. She didn't argue. She said, thank you very much. And she became a pilot. And And there has never been a time, in my lifetime at least, where we need you guys. We need everyone to go around obstacles that are unfair, are a throwback, are limiting what potential we all have. So it's a great honor to speak to this group who gets it and who's getting it done. Working at National Geographic, we have the privilege of being with people and being in places. As the panel said so clearly, if you go to the town that's got the wind farms, if you go to the manufacturing places, you get it on a level that you just wish you could share with the rest of the world. And the power of photography can help get that done. That's why National Geographic is known for photography, because we bring people to places and situations that they might not be able to go to on their own. And initially, when I started working for Geographic, I was mostly focused on taking beautiful pictures and showing the world to people. But as time went on, I also got interested in pictures being useful as well as beautiful. And I realized that that was the something I could do. That was the legacy I could leave. So I started out with environmental issues. You know, this is all that remains of the mighty Colorado River when it reaches the Sea of Cortez, because we've siphoned off every drop. That's unsustainable. And you can imagine the impact on the Sea of Cortez when that fresh water no longer flows. The Dead Sea is shrinking at an alarming rate, so alarming that it's leaving behind, you know, sort of nothing but piles of salt. And this is in a region where water is so important. And so that reality of global warming is alarming to everyone in the region. The oil and gas industry has so carved up these salt marshes at the, in the Mississippi River Delta. And those salt marshes are the filter that slows down something like a horrific hurricane. And we're paying for that now. It's been so clear to me that if you want people to value their natural treasures, you have to think like them. So if you want to save the orangutans, you have to consider the people who live there and help provide an economic reason for them to value that resource. You have to think like they are. You have to understand they need to feed their families, and you have to help them understand that there are other industries that they can go to, including tourism. When I was a very young photographer, in this picture I look like a bug, don't I? I learned how incredible and how misrepresented poor women were. They are, in fact, the most creative people on earth. These women keep their kids alive. And it takes every ounce of creativity and knowledge and determination to do that. You know, this particular tribe was going through 7 years of drought, and they lived in the most beautiful desert on earth. I mean, it's beautiful, but how would you like to try to find lunch for yourself and your kids? But they did. They did. And there was this kind of choreography with the animals that they lived with, because they were each other's food. And it led to a incredibly creative relationship and absolutely no waste, which I know, thank you panel for talking about how to trim back waste. I don't think there's a word for waste in their language. I spent a lot of time in the Middle East working with women, and it's a gender-separate society. But these, these women are great. And they're, the propaganda makes it seem like, well, if it's gender separate, and there are many gender separate societies, that then the women must be being treated horribly. And that is just not the case. Most families love each other. They have a different way of living. There are all the problems we have, but I think, we need to tell these stories. One of the problems, I think, that I'm seeing, and I'm a little ticked off at my own industry, which is media, because I have never seen more underreported stories or unreported stories, because there's this tweet-a-thon coverage that, get over it. Let's not take our resources and focus on the ugly side of politics. We got to report it, but then how about we move on to what really is what we're losing because of this nonsense, and depth. Because the truth is, in the real world, the big stories are not breaking news. The big stories don't break. They exist, and they're complex, and they require context and real reporting, never more so than women. So at a certain point in my career, I decided that I would start working for aid organizations. And I quickly realized that the programs that were most effective were the ones that were aimed toward women in the developing world. And pretty soon there was tremendous data to show that that was true. And yet at the time, 2 cents out of every American aid dollar was going to programs that lift women. And that made me furious. And I think we all have to use our anger to motivate us towards solutions. Not in a necessarily an angry way, but anger can be a great motivator, as it was for my mother when she was told she couldn't follow her career path because she wore glasses. And women do it all over the place. They are the unsung heroes. They're almost always portrayed as victims, and they are, in fact, survivors and heroes who are sometimes really victimized and have more obstacles than the males in our society and all societies. So I was doing this work and really starting to feel better and understand the wider world. And then I was in this horrible refugee camp in Kenya. And I met this Somali woman, and I just liked her so much. And she was young, and her baby was really sick. And I had my own personal crisis, which I think we all have, where it's like, this is hopeless. How can I make a dent in this? You know, it's too big. But I did my job, and I photographed her. And 2 years later, I was in a refugee coordinator's office in Richmond, Virginia, and this had been torn out of the publication it was done for and pinned on the wall. And I saw it, and I said to him, wow, that looks familiar. And he said, oh yeah, and she's doing great. And I couldn't believe it. And I said, you know her? He said, oh yeah, they're one of our refugee families. She got out. Now, I didn't get her out. I take pictures. But if my pictures can help those organizations do the important work, then that is what I want to do for the rest of my life. Now, 3 weeks ago, I found Marwa. You can see, so look at this picture carefully. There she is. And the 3-year-old sick little baby girl is now 16 and looking at colleges. So it works. It works. This is, you know, what you guys do, it really does matter, no matter how discouraging things are at times. There is less poverty. There are more girls in school. There are diseases being halted. It works. And everybody has their bit to do. So I called my girlfriends, who are some of the best photographers in the world, and I said, look, how about if we learn from the women we cover, because they'd all been doing aid work also. I said, they work together. So how about we work together? I think we'll get a lot more done. And they all said yes, and we started Ripple Effect Images. And we focused on the things that empower women, on the basic needs that then lead to great success in their lives, water being a huge one. It's a huge one. And, you know, an incredible number of women and girls spend most of their day going to collect really bad water. But when it comes out of suddenly, this picture's in Cambodia, where the kids are seeing water come out of the ground for the very first time, you know, it's doable. And they're happy to do the work. They just need a little engineering, a little cement, and they'll do the rest. And if you're hauling water for hours every day, you are never going to use it to bathe. You're going to use it to keep your family alive. And when they have water and they can actually feel clean, what it does for their self-esteem is just extraordinary to see. Agriculture, I mean, women in Africa and Southeast Asia, they are the majority of the farmers. And usually they do all the labor, and some guy comes in and takes their stuff and pays them a poor rate, and they go back to work. But when women get a little bit of education about how to grow healthier crops or how to keep their livestock alive, they'll do it. And more importantly, when they're taught to work collectively, as in this program, they take out that middleman, and they realize they can do this. It's not rocket science. It's just a cooperative of women. So here's the farmers on the right, and looking better than I have done in my entire life, and she's just come from the field. And women have been weighing and grading the crop, and so she's waiting to see how it looks. Meanwhile, out back is the commodities broker, and she's calling down to the market to find out what the selling price of that grain is, and underselling it by a couple of rupees. She comes back in, and voila, she sold it all. These women will never go back. They will never go back. They understand what they're capable of. There are health issues that, if women are just taught some basic things about nutrition, about growth, they will take it over. They will weigh their kids and measure their kids and wash their kids and feed their kids the right things. The health issue that I'm like a dog with a bone about this, that just has broken my heart, is the number one killer of women and of kids 5 and under in the entire developing world. It kills more people than malaria, AIDS, and tuberculosis combined. And yet almost nobody knows that it's indoor pollution. Not just from stoves, but from lighting and from heating. It is also 100% preventable. But somehow it's never been cast as the global health disaster that it is. And it's going to take that kind of complex response to solve it. And if anybody here wants to work with me to get this done, please come find me, because I've been in the hospitals with the pneumonia and the heart disease and the eye disease and all of it, and I'm determined to try to shine a light on this and get moving in the right direction. And it's global. It's everywhere. And the solutions are, it's so lovely to see what happens when you present women with options in their lives to heat, to cook, to light. It was interesting, when I left this woman's house, she was testing clean cook stoves, but when I walked out, I noticed there was this beautiful Hindi writing over the doorway of her house. And I said to my guide, "Oh, what does that say?" And she said, "It's her name." I said, "It's her name?" She said, "Yeah, we have this women's group, and there was a terrible flood, and a lot of women lost their home. And if we helped them rebuild their home, one of the deal breakers was, we can't do it unless her name is over the door, because it's her house." And I said to her, "Wow, what did her husband think of that?" And she looked at me and she said, "He got a house." And to me, that is it. If you want a culture to value its women, show how valuable they are. That's what works. Education, huge, huge, huge. The numbers are extraordinary on what happens if a girl gets an education. And some of the most progressive countries out there are realizing and creating, like Rwanda, mandatory education for all children, not just the boys. And it's working. These girls are, going to marry later. They're going to have fewer children. They're going to believe in themselves. They're going to have a better chance at economic independence. And it's everywhere. I mean, I was in Jordan in the desert with a Bedouin family, and I look over, and Hamoudi's daughter is on an iPad doing her schoolwork. It's so cool. In Bolivia, women who don't have the chance to get an education can also really be taught so many things. Education has nothing to do with intelligence. We forget that. So this program teaches women to build solar lanterns. They become solar engineers, and they do the entire thing. In this picture, this woman is taking her final exam. She's built 50 lanterns, and she's been given one that's broken to see if she can fix it. And she passed. And the next day, she got to take 50 lanterns to her girlfriends in her little village. Now look at her body language. when she arrives to give them solar lanterns. And look at the girlfriends. You know, they've got a bottle of light, which will lead to their safety and to their, just ease their lives and extend their days. This woman had never had a day of school, but she was taught to run a solar desalination plant in an incredibly salty part of India. I went there to show the salt farming, which is often done by young girls. And it's devastating, health-wise. But this aid organization was helping with that. And at the end of the day, this little girl walked over, and I hadn't even seen she had a solar lantern. So I said to her, wow, what can you do now that you've got the solar lantern? And she said, I go to school at night. And I found out that in her region, 70,000 children who have to work during the day are now going to school at night because of solar lanterns. And that's the way out of the salt mines. That's the way out. I'm going to finish in Pakistan, where, I have these amazing days. I'm so lucky. And this was one day. I was in a very remote part of Pakistan. We were like 4 hours from the nearest road. And we ended up in this little village, and they invited us to stay. We knew we were going to be sleeping in the desert that night. And they said, well, why don't you stay in our village? And we said, thank you. And with that, they brought out their 2 best cots and their best quilts. And the girls had made soup. And so we're sitting out there eating our soup, and everyone's watching us take every bite. And then it became really dark. And so one of the women said, would you like music? And I said, we would love music. And with that, 4 or 5 elderly guys came out with handmade instruments. And they sat and made a semicircle around our cots and played until we fell asleep. And it's the same thing my mom taught me as a little girl. People who have nothing give everything. And I promise you, they had never heard of National Geographic. They were just treating me with kindness. And so how can I not spend the rest of my life trying to give a little something back? Thank you very much.